Hello all, this is the Owl, and today, as requested, we'll be taking a look at this tome of bloody madness. Why oh why do I do polls? Anyway, the Dark Magical Girl subgenre, which started out as one of those, hey, isn't it fun making this cutesy poo, sometimes inappropriately titillating thing, super dark and depressing satirical experiments, proved so popular that it quickly became its own thing, and from there, sort of ballooned out to the point where this subgenre now sits under the actual magical girl genre like a very big egg under a very small duck. There are just so many examples, with likely the most well-known being the beautiful and yet extremely bleak Madoka Magica, and of course the incredibly edgy Magical Girl site. And it's just not my thing. Yeah, sorry folks, it just isn't. I know some Dark Magical Girl stories are pretty decent, but most are pretty mediocre, and I find that they all tend to run together after a point. And this segues quite neatly into Kentaro Sato. Sato is probably the most well-known contributor to this subgenre, mostly due to the aforementioned Magical Girl site, which, oof, yeah, that one is quite something. Believe it or not, it was one of the entries on my anime and manga controversy iceberg that I wound up completely omitting, as no matter how I framed it, the script kept wandering into territory that YouTube is not a fan of. If you've read it, you know what I mean. Yeah, I might just have to cover it one day, but I'd have to tread oh so carefully right now, as it's super dark and really, really icky. And it's also apparently a spin-off to today's entry, Magical Girl Apocalypse. Sato is, by the sounds of it, an interesting man. While details on him are thin on the ground, by the sounds of it, he's a pretty decent dude, despite also being a horny weirdo, apparently known for drawing some gross porn, and identifying with, well, we'll get there. Now, Magical Girl Apocalypse isn't just a dark magical girl story. As the title may suggest, it's also another entry in what I like to call the what the fuckalypse genre, featuring something generally cute and wholesome suddenly going completely evil and wiping out humanity. You might have heard of Shibuya Goldfish, and we did Pygmalion a bit back on this channel too. Ditto, oh, what was it called? Jinmen. Oh right. Frigging Kadokawa. These are usually somewhat light on story and characterization, mostly revolving around a sizable buffet of characters getting offed in creatively gruesome fashion by all sorts of weird shit, and an overarching plot that goes steadily more and more Billy bonkers, generally while playing it all completely straight. And yet, even by the nebulous standards of the what the fuckalypse genre, Magical Girl Apocalypse stands out, because this manga is, oh boy, I will say this at the outset. I like this manga, and I've certainly reread it more than once, which is generally a sign that there's more to something than meets the eye. However, I don't think I could say that I love it. I'll try to explain as we move through. That said, before we dive into spoilers, as mild as they will be for this thing, I will recommend it to anyone with a strong stomach and a taste for the surreal. You will never read anything quite like this one. It's big, it's gory as all hell, and it's crazier than a weasel pancake. So without any further ado, let's dive on in. Our story opens with Kogami, our protagonist who's settling in for another day at school. He's a schlubby, disaffected young man with a crush on Natsuki, one of his classmates. We are also introduced to Tsukune, one of his childhood friends and frequently the victim of extremely intense bullying. Yeah, you'll notice a few things right off the bat. Sato's art, while not bad, is closer to doujinshi than mainstream manga, aka porn, with a lot of detail on the characters, particularly the women, and less so on the backgrounds. Although I will happily say that his art gets really good as the series goes on, albeit relying sometimes a bit too heavily on that trick that I think Hiroya Oku pioneered, where a mangaka will take a digital photograph and then superimpose art over it. Hint, look for fuzzy white or grey borders around characters and effects. And yes, you will now never be able to unsee this. A lot of modern manga, especially seinen for some reason, really like this trick. Sato also has a tendency to use bullying and abuse honestly excessively as a theme. And yeah, as you'll see later, he's one sick puppy when it comes to gore. Very little of which I can show you here. Rest assured that this is an incredibly and quite creatively graphic and explicit manga when it comes to blood and guts as well as boobs. I am not kidding. Some of the kills in this thing are so far off the chain that I don't think I have ever seen the like. And, well, if you're into that sort of thing, this will definitely tickle your pickle. It's not quite Umineko levels of I just threw up in my own brain realistic gore. It's more splatstick, splatsquick. Let's go with splatsquick. That's just fun to say. The sort of stuff that Peter Jackson would have made in the 80s if, you know, he wrote manga. Sure enough, before too long, a strange and off-putting figure shows up. An oddly proportioned girl with a huge head, cutesy clothing, and an odd-looking wand, which blows off the kendo instructor's head with a single touch. Yup, we've got the first of our magical girls. Extremely powerful, extremely dangerous creatures, each of whom has a unique ability. Within seconds, the creature flies into their classroom and in, well, I won't even say the most notorious scene in this manga, but it's pretty well known nonetheless, begins butchering the students in visceral and bloody fashion, which, yeah, again, this is a manga where I really can't show you much of it, not without YouTube calling down an orbital strike. Eventually, Kogami goes completely nutty butties and, channeling his inner Keiichi Maibara, beats the creature to death with his bat, but not before it kills Natsuki, leaving him and Tsukune as some of the only survivors. However, we also learn that the magical girl is virtually immortal, regenerating its head in a wonderfully grotesque fashion. Oh, and we also see that anyone she kills will rise again as a zombie. They flee, eventually linking up with a handful of other survivors, but as the now larger group prepares to escape the growing zombie horde, we see the sky overhead shatter and hundreds of different, morbidly designed magical girls rain down. Before too long, the survivors escape in a crappy car with another magical girl hot on their heels, and we see that the phenomenon is spreading. This is what's probably going to decide whether you like this manga or not. The tone here is all over the place, from absurd, surreal, and often sexy shenanigans, to completely insane gore, to some really edgy moments, to massive power-driven shonen-style battles, and everything in between. you are either going to be on its wavelength or not, as it's trying to be both tongue-in-cheek and sincere all at the same time, and I guess unless you're the Venture Brothers, that's a tonal tightrope to walk. Oh right, there's one more problem. For a premise as silly as a variety of bizarre magical girls invade Earth and turn people into breakfast pate in weird and creative ways, this is a long-ass manga. Like, probably quadruple the length it needed to be honest. And yeah, while it does go delightfully insane towards the end, and definitely gets wild enough to be fun, it's really flabby around the middle, with a lot of faffing around and running in place. That's the thing about this sort of isn't it weird shock story. If you don't keep it short, sweet, and bloody, you risk losing the shock, and it just becomes tedious. It's like, imagine if Cocaine Bear had been 4 hours long, or if Hellraiser had, you know, I'm just going to go and sit down and be sad for a while. Before too long, we wind up in probably the most stock apocalyptic location imaginable, a shopping mall, and are introduced to, oh joy, this character. I have no idea why this is a trope in What the Fuckalypse stories, but it really is. The creepy predatory dude that inevitably gets some sort of ironic comeuppance. And as far as I know, this is the guy that Kentaro Sato most identifies with and, believe it or not, will become something not far off a protagonist as the story progresses, or at least a main character, despite him being just a massive degenerate. Akuta Rintaro is one of the many things that I am not a fan of in this manga, as A, I'm not sure if he's supposed to be a parody character or someone to be taken seriously, and B, the manga seems to think he's really funny and weirdly charming when he's actually just gross and depraved. What do I mean? Well, his first act, aside from attempted rape, is to shoot one of the girls in the leg to assert his authority, and things very nearly get even uglier in a series of panels that, no, I cannot show here. Fortunately, he gets twatted one in the head by this dude, Ren, and to this story's credit, a lot of the punchlines involve Rintaro getting deservedly smacked for being loathsome and edgy. Soon, they wind up joining a larger group of survivors in the food court and find another of their former schoolmates, a hearing-impaired kid called Himeji. And I forget what this character's name even is. Regardless, Big Boobs Girl, no, the other Big Boobs Girl, begins to puke up blood before Ren, who it turns out is a med student, diagnoses her with internal injuries and says that she will need medical attention fairly soon, or she'll probably just cark it. Suddenly, SDF helicopters begin flying overhead, but they don't stop, despite the party hoping for rescue. And before they know what's happening, a body-hopping parasitic magical girl infiltrates the mall and kills a whole bunch of survivors. Yeah, this nightmare fuel, and probably one of the most iconic of the things. This creature is actually in this manga quite a bit. I guess the image of a cutesy head on a grotesquely muscular and gigantic body is just too distinctly odd not to use a bunch. But yeah, like so much of this manga, there is only so much of these panels I am going to chance showing on YouTube because they are graphic. Its ability seems to be the possession of other beings, as well as dramatically enhancing their physical abilities, and this also happens to be where we learn that the magical girls are, at the very least, sentient. The parasite girl rampages around, killing a whole lot more survivors in just a bloodbath of a sequence. And with that, the party flees, taking along a few other survivors with the parasite girl in hot pursuit. But Miki bites the dust when it knocks her head clear off and into a bowl of ramen. Yeah, again, splat squick. Oh, and Ren also gets badly injured in their escape. But by teaming up with Rintaro, they manage to finally take the parasite girl out of commission. And keep in mind, we are still in the sane parts of the manga. Once again, I'm not really going to go too far into spoilers. Let's just say, this thing goes so buck wild by the end, it might as well be channeling Graham Masterton. We do get a few scraps of information, like that there's some bigger thing at play here, the so-called Magical Girl Project, some sort of elaborate scheme or game in which the party have found themselves as players. This will mostly be explained as the story goes on. We do also learn, however, that as per the regeneration we saw earlier, attacking the magical girls is pointless, as they'll always regenerate, but if you destroy their wands, then that girl will die. Ren tends to his wound himself, while Kogami and one of the girls that bullied Tsukune, Sayano, share a bit of a moment. Kogami asks her what the hell happened to turn her into such a bully, as she was a really great person in junior high school, and Sayano briefly says, "Help me," then pretends like she's totally fine. Now, I am not going to spoil the twist here, but I will say that it's honestly very clever. Seriously, I did not see this coming, and it is, by a mile, probably the best thing about this manga. I'm not even being sarcastic. Even in such a bug-nuts insane and at times squicky story, it is to Kentaro Sato's credit that he manages to land a narrative haymaker every so often, and this one works like gangbusters, recontextualizing a lot of stuff we thought we knew. There are also a lot of other twists and turns as we go, but while some of them are definitely crazier, this one hits the hardest. And it's one of the reasons why this manga might, in due course, assuming this channel survives, yeah, I won't lie folks, it's touch and go right now, get a deep dive. Again, for a what the fuckalypse story, it's really bloody good in places in terms of character stuff. As they catch their breath in the mall, they see on the TV that things are all sorts of messed up all over Japan, and that anyone killed by the girls comes back as a zombie, not just the first girl they encountered as they believed. Yeah, one of the weird things about this manga is that it's also a sort of backdoor zombie apocalypse thing, complete with an overt Dawn of the Dead reference. I have no idea why. This aspect of the story comes and goes, I guess, but it's there. Eventually though, after a fair bit of time has passed, they are displaced by a massive and incredibly unsettling gigantic magical girl, and in the aftermath, they're all left pretty banged up and get separated, agreeing to head to the university in the hopes of getting treatment and finding another safe haven. And keep in mind that we are 2 volumes into what, 16? As I said, while there's a lot of stuff I do like about this manga, it's long-winded to the point of frustration. We do slowly get drip-fed bits of what's going on, and as I've said before, towards the end this thing goes so far off the rails that it's impossible not to have fun with, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are going to hit the doldrums towards the middle of it and kind of just give up there. Anyway, after they're blasted back in time by another magical girl, long story, Kogami and Sayano, the bully from earlier, wind up together, and we get some more characterization that's honestly really good. Kogami, for instance, has a severely messed up childhood that led to him basically disengaging from society, leading to him becoming a disaffected slacker. And without spoilers, this extended time travel segment might actually be my favorite part of the entire manga, without a single magical girl or zombie in sight. Just some great character and relationship building. For instance, Rintaro wants to return to the apocalypse, where he could be relevant, even as a massive degenerate, rather than a powerless nobody, giving us an insight into an utterly reprehensible character's backstory that, while it doesn't exactly make him sympathetic, it certainly humanizes him somewhat. And, as with so much of this manga, it's setting up some wild shit to come. There's even, at this point, a pretty damn compelling mystery being set up. But again, I will say this much, the payoff, well, you're either going to love it or you won't. Again, Sato's work tends to be defined by him having a lot of great ideas and doing a lot of cool setup, but his results tend to be so on the completely bananas side of things that they're almost to the point of being a non sequitur sometimes. I know a lot of people love this manga, so you may well enjoy it if you're on the right wavelength or have done a crap ton of shrooms or something. I'm still not entirely sure whether it's all supposed to be very tongue-in-cheek or if it's supposed to be taken seriously, and either way, it's quite something. Again, I don't dislike this manga. I'm just a bit too old to get really sucked into stuff that makes my brain squeak. Regardless, the party starts coming back together. We get a few new characters added, but before we know it, we're back in the apocalypse. And yeah, things sort of proceed much in the same vein as you would expect for a long, long time. Characters are introduced, characters are killed off, we get more magical girls, including this bloody overpowered bit of nightmare fuel. Seriously, this thing is insane. And we get tons more magical gore to boot. We also do gradually learn the truth of what's happening, and if you thought Jinmen went batty bonkers bananas later on, this makes that look positively sane. Let's just say, among other things, it kind of becomes an overpowered battle shonen sci-fi series with time travel, alternate universes, full-on deities, and more. Whatever Sato was taking while writing this, well, it was likely something spectacular. And that's where I think we should leave off, as anything else I could say would probably wander into pretty big spoiler territory, and I suspect some of you might want to read this for yourselves. Again, if you are having fun at this point, or if what I've outlined, ups and downs, doesn't make you nope out, you will probably continue to have fun right through. Just be aware that the middle volumes can be a bit of a slog, but the mystery stays mysterious, the kills stay bloody, the magical girls stay weird, and the characterization remains surprisingly good, including a death scene so bizarre and so iconic that you are unlikely to ever forget it. If you've read this thing, you know. I'm gonna go out jacking it. So, yeah, again, if you folks do want me to do a deep dive on this thing, I could definitely see myself doing it. Because while I don't love this manga, I do like it, and there is a lot to say about it. For what it is, I've read this thing a few times now, not counting this video, so it must be doing something right. It's one of those, it is what it is manga. Just doing its thing, and by the looks of it, has amassed a sizable cult following. Anyway, before we finish for the day, I want to give a huge thanks, as always, to my fantastic patrons. Cheddar, Piece of Yeast, Elspresso, Cheerful Satanist, Starwin Marwin, Question Man 6, Kel Core, Jacob Ramsey, Crazy, Opinion Custard, Wargle, Hunting for R2D2, Inukia Koji, Rose Montgomery, Lance Goebel, Rafferty, Erin Arnold, The Hedgehog Gamer, Simone, XTC Pill, Cobalt Worm, B Empress, Jake, Ranger Danger, Lucian, and Cheshire Quill. If you want to see more like this, why not stick around? Subscribe, bell, you know the drill. If you want to hear me say your name, get early access to most of my videos, have some fun perks on the Discord, and, you know, help this channel to survive, it's still really touch and go, folks. Why not take a look at our Patreon? If you want to chit chat about, well, basically anything, drop by our Discord. Take care, my friends, and cheers. This is the Owl, signing off.